Sylvia Yu Friedman. Actually, when I go through this list of things related to who she is, I kind of feel like a slacker.
No, you are.
Author of 3 books, one with Penguin and another one with Penguin, the 4th one coming out. She's been a philanthropist. She worked in Beijing to advise billionaire families on how to basically spend money. She's been a journalist for years, a news anchor in Canada, where she was actually reporting on the news, film producer for TVB, where she did many, many documentaries. In fact, that's where we met. An independent filmmaker who's won a bunch of awards for her documentaries in all different countries around the world. She's got a Human Rights Award. She's got a TV series that's being made based on her book, A Long Road to Justice. Great public speaker, amazing person, my best friend, and my partner in crime. So I'm thrilled to have her presenting today, and I'll just give it over to you, Dan.
Oh, thank you. And Matt jokes. He said, "Oh, you look too young today," and he said, "You need to tell them you're nearly 50." So I am indeed nearly 50. Okay, so by the way, that Georgia joke was funny. I laughed out loud when Cindy had to clarify, because Georgia, the Russian state, or it's affiliated with Russia, is in the news. And anyways, I will now get to my PowerPoint. Here we go. Start. Here we go. Okay. Can you all see it? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. So this book, I've been speaking a lot on my book journey, A Long Road to Justice, because I compiled all of the survivor testimonies that I gathered over 20 years, including historical wartime sex trafficking of women who were sexually enslaved by the Japanese military before and during World War II. And this is the first form of organized sex trafficking that is known in modern history, and it was government approved. And I will go into that a little bit later. And so a lot of the NGOs that are focused on trauma healing, they know about these women, these wartime sex slaves, because they are, there's so much research, so much information that can be gleaned from their recovery, from their lack of healing, from their trauma, from their wounds. And I was able to witness that firsthand. But I will first talk about the modern day cases that I came across, and meeting these people, meeting these survivors of the unspeakable. They suffered so horribly beyond what you and I can imagine, you know, having no control over their own bodies and being sold, you know, and treated like a piece of cattle. It was very transformative. And, you know, after meeting so many traumatized people who were in dire need, in desperate need, it really marked me. And I really can't, what's the word? Yeah, I feel like I can't really be materialistic. You know, I can't bring myself to spend a lot of money. You know, a lot of people spend over $1,000 US, and I'm not knocking anyone in this group who does, but I just can't do that anymore, because it reminds me of the cost of a human being, you know, and it reminds me of, gosh, you know, that kind of money can go to help someone, you know, help someone in a shelter, or help someone, you know, out of debt bondage. And so it's really had an impact. And both Matt and myself, we've dedicated, you know, a large chunk of our time to helping to eliminate modern day slavery. And we were part of the beginnings of the movement in Asia around 2012, 2013. And Matt was the mastermind, or the brain, he was the brainchild behind a lot of the movement that happened. And then I was the the operations person. I was the executor, the producer, and I'll show you some photos if there's time, but we reached over 25,000 people in a 2-year period. And the movement was quite miraculous, I would say. And we had over 100 churches in Hong Kong working together, which is unheard of, because in Hong Kong, 2 churches can barely get along. You know, they can barely work together, because this is a really fast-paced, very competitive city. There's a lot of money in this city. And anyways, it was just a real miracle. And so as Matt said, I worked as a journalist and as a philanthropy advisor. So I was part of funding some of the earliest anti-trafficking projects in mainland China and in Southeast Asia, like in Thailand. And yeah, I really felt honored that I was able to, be part of launching these organizations that are, a few of them are really thriving today. And I'll begin with the story, because I realize I don't have a lot of time. I think I have 20 minutes in total, so I'll try to speed up. So in China, I was the first to get the trafficked women on video camera. It's nearly impossible to get information on sex trafficking or any kind of trafficking in China because of the control over the information. And so it's quite dangerous, actually. And so one of the organizations that I helped fund, it was led by missionaries, actually. And I wanted to film a certain area that was very notorious. It was one of the worst red light districts. And it was so remote that there were no street lamps. And it was so dark outside that the stars were just so visible. Like I've never seen stars so bright. And it's because there was no light pollution. And so the NGO leader, she advised me, she said, oh, just walk by the brothel, the windows where the women were sitting and in their garish makeup and their tight skirts. And she said, oh, just walk by and pretend that you're a tourist and you're just, you're texting somebody on your phone and tape surreptitiously that way. And, I initially thought, gosh, that doesn't sound very wise, but I thought, okay, you're the frontline person, and she's literally come between a man who is beating a woman and the woman and saved that woman. Like she's risked her life so many times, and she's done courageous things. She's helped a lot of women come out of sex trafficking in China. And I thought, okay, I'm going to listen to you, and why not? You know this context. So I did. I walked through that alleyway in one of the most notorious brothels in China. And there were barking dogs, vicious dogs. There were mama-sans and thugs who were guarding the women. And when I walked through, I did, and I was pretending to text, and all the while I was filming, and I thought I had the footage, and I leapt to the car, and I was so happy, and I thought, yes, I outsmarted the thugs and the mama-sans, and lo and behold, 1 second later, they were, pounding on the car door and saying, get out. And my fingers were trembling, and by a miracle, because I wasn't very good with my iPhone back then, and this is around 2012, and by some miracle, with my trembling thumb, I deleted all the video and the photos, and I got out. And then I was, when they started, shouting at me, there were like around five of them, thugs and mama-sans, screaming like an inch from my face. And there was another missionary frontline worker who was with me, and we got out, and we thought we were going to die. Like we thought, okay, our lives are flashing before us. Our bodies are going to end up in a ditch. Game over, right? And I was just so sad I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to my family. This is before Matt and I got together. And so that was he wasn't even in the picture. But anyways, I by some miracle, so they're saying you're posting it on Weibo, that's China's Twitter. And I said, no, look at my phone. I have no video footage. I have nothing here. And suddenly one of the thugs said, the police are coming. And then they scattered like cockroaches. And this is where I now believe in miracles, because as I said, there's no street lamps, there's no police, there's no civilization. Like this, there was like an outdoor market, and they had like some, food stalls and things that people might buy late at night. But really, there was no way the police could be coming. And anyways, so what I learned from that was I was able to identify with the trafficked women on a deeper level than I would have otherwise. And they were, they're intimidated. They are scared every minute. And, and I was terrified. And if, I do hear a lot of people say, well, the women can go free, they can walk away. No, not these women in this notorious brothel. And I turned that terrifying moment and even that PTSD. And I mean, for a few months, at the slightest sound or creak in the ceiling, I would like get up and be really scared, and my heartbeat would be racing. But I channeled that into the documentary that I was producing, and I was able to empathize and identify with these women, more than I could have been able to. And for that, I am grateful. And I'm also, of course, thankful that I was able to make it out alive. And there was another situation in Myanmar where I was gathering information, taking photos, interviewing an underage sex trafficking victim, and who was kind of high on drugs at that time. And that's a common thing, as many of you will know, because you've heard other speakers. But this woman was a little bit high on drugs, and I could tell, like, she looked so empty. She looked so deeply, profoundly sad. And I remember sitting there with another frontline worker, and his platform to get into these brothels and to reach these trafficked women was through HIV awareness. And so we're sitting there, and then suddenly the pimp looks at me with this evil look in his eyes. And I remember feeling like my skin crawl, and I immediately just had a physical reaction. And I turned to another girl to talk, and then I whispered to the frontline worker, "We need to get out of here," because I just had this really creepy, unsafe feeling. And it's Myanmar, which is very at that time, we were in a certain state that anything could have happened. Life is cheap. Life is cheap in that state. So I was thankful that we were able to get out. But wow, the exploitation of the girls and women, I really saw that it was like an assembly line, like so many of these girls who were, at the prime of their lives. And what I learned was a lot of them, of course, came from impoverished families, came from parents who had divorced. They didn't know their worth. And my heart just went out to them because, had they been born into a different family or into a different circumstance, they wouldn't have been in that situation. And which got me thinking, wow, it could have been me. It could have been you. It could have been any one of us, right? And that has really propelled me as I've been interviewing and gathering information and investigating the underworld, the trafficking underworld across Asia. I don't know if any of you remember, there was a chained up woman in Suzhou, China that went viral. There was a video of this woman. She was a mother of 8 kids, and she was mentally unstable, probably because her husband, abused her so terribly. And she was chained in like a grotto or a cave. I don't know if any of you remember that, but it went viral in China, and it was viewed over like 2 billion times, this video. And what was remarkable was, and I've lived in Beijing between 2004 and 2011, and I had never during that time seen like an outcry against trafficking victim, right? And so what happened was, in the social media, it just totally lit up, and people were talking about it for more than a month. And these are like I have a banker friend who's a very senior executive, and she was saying all her lawyer friends, all her, high level, like all these successful people in China were just, they were going on and on. And yeah, it was heartbreaking when I saw the video. It was so inhumane. And it reminded me of a young woman who was chained just like that. Actually, it's quite common in China with bride trafficking, because they don't want it's usually elderly husbands who purchase the young bride, or the mother of a disabled man who would otherwise not be able to marry the traditional way. And so chaining the women, chaining the young brides is actually a common practice, but it wasn't widely known. And it was, I think when did I meet? I think it was in 2011, when I met Mei Mei, and it's this young lady who was forced into bride trafficking. She was tricked by an auntie of a good schoolmate. And this auntie, who was an opportunist, saw that Mei Mei got into a fight with her father, and it was over the fact that her father said, I have to yank you out of school, and we don't have enough money, we have to educate your younger brother, you're going to work in the fields. And she was so furious. And so this auntie caught wind of that and lured her into a train ride into the so-called city to go shopping. And instead of going shopping, she took Mei Mei, and it was a husband-wife team, and her husband was waiting at the apartment, and she brought Mei Mei to this apartment. Mei Mei was confused and wondering, well, why are we going here? And so the auntie was lying all along. And so once she got into the apartment, her husband, the auntie's husband, pushed her inside a room that only had a wastebasket and a little mattress on the floor. And she was not given any water or food for 2 weeks. And basically they starved her. They waited until all her strength was gone. She was pounding on the door for so long until she just didn't have any strength. And she was confused. She didn't know what was going on. After 2 weeks or so, an elderly farmer came in and inspected her, just inspected her like she was some animal, like a piece of cattle. And he gave a wad of money to, the uncle and auntie, and basically said to her, you're coming with me, you're going to be my wife. And she was very confused, but in this process of him saying, you're coming with me, he punched her. I think he punched her and hit her repeatedly. I think he was concerned that she might fight back, but she was just too weakened to do anything. So she was crying, like, I'm not going to resist, like, just don't stop hitting me. And so she ended up going back with him to his home, and he chained her up in the kitchen. And she had to sleep there. She couldn't move very far. She had to cook. And then at 15, she found her belly growing, and she didn't know anything about what pregnancy was. She had no clue what was going on in her body. And so all of a sudden, this baby slips out. She doesn't even go into the hospital. Okay. And I think someone must have come and helped her. So here she is taking care of this baby, and her elderly husband, I think, who was in his 70s at the time, and she's only 15 with this baby, and she's taking care of him, and then gave her a little bit more freedom. And that's how she escaped. But she, to make a long story short, she went from one frying pan into another, because when she ran away with, you know, the money that she was able to collect, coins and everything, she got off the bus at the bus depot. And just like in America or anywhere around the world, there was a trafficker woman waiting for her and lured her, promising to help her, and forced her to sell her body in a brothel this time. And so that same organization that you know I talked about in the beginning, you know, where the woman, the frontline lady, advised me to film, they were the ones to go into the brothel where May was, and they were doing condom education, HIV prevention, because that was their way in. Otherwise, the doors would not be open. They would not be welcome. And they brought gifts and they talked. And somehow one of them was able to get May like close and have a one-on-one conversation, and quickly said, May, there's a way out. If you want to get out, we have it, you know, we have an organization and we can offer you job training. And so thankfully, she was able to leave, and she almost killed herself. And she was able to leave. She received some rehab and some counseling, but honestly, it wasn't enough. You know, when I was talking with her, I could still tell that there was some trauma. And I had some trepidation when she said, no, I'm going to leave, you know, I'm going to leave this organization, and she was going to make her own way in the world. But she said something that has stayed with me. She said, I want to warn and tell other women. And I'm telling you my story because I don't want what happened to me to happen to other women. What a brave young lady. I have also written about North Korean trafficked women in the region. And I've also seen the rescue efforts, and it's called the Underground Railroad. And it's reminiscent of the Underground Railroad during the time of slavery in North America, where people were rescuing those who were enslaved. And so there is a courageous network of two groups. One main group are pastors, missionaries, mostly Korean American or Korean Canadian or South Korean. The gentleman on the right is an American married to a South Korean in Seoul. That's Tim Peters, and he's been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. But to make a long story short, I've interviewed North Korean women who were sold as brides for as little as $300 US. That's less than a cost of an iPhone. And one woman was sold even multiple times by her husband, and they were trading these North Korean women, and often Vietnamese women, Burmese women, Pakistani women have even come into the picture, and they'll trade, some of these men will trade these women like playing cards. It's really evil. It's wicked. It's wicked. And one woman, Sujin, she left her children behind, the children she had with the husband, the farmer husband that she was forced to marry. And actually the Sujin lady had cancer, and a missionary actually prayed for her, and her cancer was healed. And she was grappling with the idea of going back inside North Korea and going, like, knowing that she would be imprisoned. But for her, she felt like she was called by God possibly to go back and share about her newfound faith. And I don't know what happened to her, but I've also met a woman named Soyoung who was 15. She was imprisoned in North Korea, and then she escaped, and then she was sold as a bride like a few times. And then recently on my LinkedIn interview show called Inspiring You with Sylvia Yu, I interviewed a trafficked North Korean woman, a survivor who lives in the UK. And anyways, if you want to see that, I can share that, or you can look me up on LinkedIn. And I realize I have a few more minutes left, but these North Korean women need help. I do know of a US NGO. I'm actually moving away. I've moved away in the last 7 years away from frontline NGOs. And the reason is there is a trend that is global right now, and that is more people are behind the corporate movement of professionals who are getting involved and using their influence to clean up, second, third, fourth tier supply chains. And that's what Matt was sensing, even like while he was at the United Nations. I feel like this is the next frontier for fighting modern slavery. It's not really the brothels. It's not really, although I've been one of the early advocates for funding trauma healing. That is a gap need, funding trauma counselors so that survivors, you can give them all the job training in the world, all the support in the world, but if they don't have specialized trauma healing, they're going to go from one terrible situation into another. And so anyways, what I want to say is that, and I've been the first to get, I'm just going to say this and then I'll try to wrap up back to that earlier point. I was the first to identify and speak with trafficking victims from Africa in Hong Kong. There's a form of compensated dating kind of exploitation, which is like young people, youth in high school who are selling kisses, selling sex. It is a form of exploitation. It's kind of like sugar babies, but they don't have any protection when they're one-on-one in a hotel room, and it's quite dangerous. And some of them have been murdered. And I've interviewed and documented some of the first Filipina sex trafficking victims in the bar areas. And actually, through Matt's help, I was able to expose child domestic workers in Hong Kong for the first time, as well as the plight of domestic workers in debt bondage. Because in Hong Kong, before I reported on that, no one perceived domestic workers as being victims of trafficking. And I've also interviewed ex-traffickers like Kaushik, who's in Manila, and he does like a social enterprise project training. I really believe in the training, giving job opportunities, as well as trauma care. And then corporates, that is where the movement is heading. Because if you rescue 10 victims out of a brothel, you're going to get 100 more. And it's going to be a never ending stream. And so, yeah, and the exploited children that I've seen, that's like so terrible. But we need to reach the influencers. We need to do, and this is what I used to do in China and the region. I used to do strategic initiative philanthropic funds, where we pull a bunch of money together, or there is a donor who wants to give like 5 million US a year. And then we choose the NGOs and we get them to give and reach high level goals, not just little tiny, like we're going to do this and that, which is, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, because that encourages everyone to get involved. So one last note about Comfort Woman. This is really the earliest human trafficking form of human trafficking. And that's also in my book. There's a lot of generational pain. I've been involved in racial reconciliation. I just want to show some of the movement. We've done bands, concerts, education awareness, sweatshop simulations. We produce music, concerts, work with university students all over the world, held conferences that also had a healing component for frontline workers. Because of my experience with trauma, I realized, these frontline workers, man, they need healing. So anyway, and we had prayer, and it spread all over the world. And so my hope is, let's raise up volunteers, people, professionals, and sorry, I went a little bit too long. Okay, sorry about that.